Committee for Consultation, FWCC. In that role, Gretchen traveled extensively among Quakers worldwide. Her many duties included representing Friends with the Quaker United Nations offices in Geneva and New York, and with the World Council of Churches. And she did all of this with great distinction. Before that, before taking on her leadership role at FWCC, Gretchen served with a number of Friends organizations, including a stint as presiding clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. She holds a bachelor's degree from Earlham College and a Master of Education in Adult Organizational Learning from Temple University in Philadelphia, which is also my alma mater. I've been blessed to have gotten to know Gretchen quite well over the years. As it happens, I was temporarily residing in England in 2012 when she became General Secretary of FWCC, and I was able to meet with her just as she was beginning her tour of duty. I was immediately taken by her beautiful, welcoming smile and her gift for listening to others carefully and responding thoughtfully. In the years that have followed, I've had the privilege of working with her on quite a few different projects. While I continue to value the attributes I saw in Gretchen when we first met, what I've come to appreciate most about her is her deep spiritual centeredness. The title of Gretchen's talk tonight is Room at the Table, Hospitality and Inclusion as a Global Imperative. Gretchen will speak out of the silence. When she concludes her talk, she'll return to her seat, we'll return to silence. After that, we'll have the traditional shaking of hands, and after that, snacks downstairs and hospitality. Welcome, Gretchen.
I've often thought the silence is the better part of the day. No matter what I have to share after this, I don't think I can improve on that silence, silent worship. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the invitation from Bobby Trist and the committee that she was working with to invite me to share with you tonight. I feel very honored. And David, thank you for your kind words. Indeed, it's been a real treat to work with David on FWCC things. We've had, especially during COVID, we had a lot of opportunity, didn't we, online? So it was really a blessing for both of us, I think. And, you know, I served as PYM's presiding clerk, and I always said I was really lucky that they allowed me to serve because I grew up in Friends United meeting and, you know, but they still they allowed me to be presiding clerk. So I'm grateful that you're allowing me to be here tonight, in spite of that. And I've wanted to talk on this topic of spiritual hospitality. It's been something we've been conversing about in the past year at Earlham School of Religion. It's a topic that fascinates me. And I just want to say I've already felt really welcome here. You know, I've already had the most delightful conversations, and people are just amazing. You know, people are amazing, and there's just not enough time to have those kind of conversations that I'll be talking about. But it's such a treat. So I just have to ask first, how many of you have taken a course or some study at the Earlham School of Religion? Oh, pretty good. Great, thanks. And Pam serves on our board of advisors now, so you can ask her anything you want. How many of you have attended an FWCC triennial or world conference? How many of you have attended those before? Okay, good. So I arrived in Kenya in 2012 for the World Conference of Friends You know, I'm thinking I need my glasses. Oh, good. Now I'll actually read what I wrote. Yeah. I arrived in Kenya in 2012 for the World Conference of Friends, during which I was to be appointed General Secretary of FWCC for the World Office in London. Standing on the edge of this possibility and responsibility, I was particularly drawn to the way in which friends would come together from all over the world, sitting around the table with each other, listening and sharing, developing the deepest of friendships, much as you do here, knowing each other in the eternal presence, the memory and connection of which would be with each of us for a lifetime. I kept coming back to that image of the table, sitting with friends, meeting that strange uncle that you've never met before, knowing he might be strange, but he would never again be a stranger. For all the ways he might be different from me, he was part of my Quaker family, and I would love him for who he is and in spite of who he is. That's what families can give us. That's what we hope to be as people of faith, as friends. That is what Jesus taught us to do. Tonight, I want to draw us into the awareness and exploration of radical spiritual hospitality. I came into this practice quite honestly. I remember at about age 13 when my family welcomed Thomas Langaho and his family from Kenya to our home in Oskaloosa, Iowa. And they came because their eldest son, Bernie, had lived with our family while he was attending William Penn University, where my father taught. When they came, they brought, Bernie's the eldest, and they brought little Oscar, who was 3 years old, whom Bernie had never met because he had been 4 years at university. So little Oscar, and we learned lots of Kiswahili. And in the end, we had just gotten a little kitten and needed to name him. And so we named him Asante Sana, which means thank you in Kiswahili. So our family had many guests over the years, and this continued in my own family. We invited people who needed to stay, who might have been in transition, and they could stay in our home for a while. We rented rooms to students who were studying shiatsu massage, bringing people to our home from Ireland and India and Italy. And it was just a great experience for our young children. And I might also report that Janice Dominic stayed with us. And she would always say, she took it in great stride. You know, we weren't always prepared well, but she always said, do you have a place on your park bench for me for tonight? Great fun those days were. And what a privilege that I've had to stay in friends' homes in Kenya, Burundi, Australia, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Budapest, Tolna, Hungary, Peru, and more I could name. The memories and my gratitude for friends' generosity will stay with me always, warming my heart and reminding me of this precious spiritual and abiding fellowship. In a conversation about different cultures, someone once asked me, have you ever had a meal that just, what's your worst meal you've had in somebody's home? Like assuming because it was many cultures, there might be things, that I really wouldn't want to eat. And I said, never, never. I never even thought that way. Why would I think that way? Because I knew how generous they were, preparing a meal, going out and killing the chicken that they have raised, really going out of their way to provide food and a bed for me. I mean, how amazing. Such deep gratitude for that. And then the conversation that followed that even deepened that appreciation. They're all gifts from God. I was blessed in more ways than I can express. In John 15, Jesus tells us to love one another as he has loved us. He calls us friends and has made everything known to us that he learned from his Father. He chose us that we could bear fruit, fruit that will last. He said, "Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name." And again, he said, "It is my command that you love one another." I want to share a story about Joe. He was a former Catholic priest turned Quaker. He was part of my meeting. And Joe needed to take his daughter to go look at colleges. And Joe didn't have a lot of extra money for this. So I explained that staying with other friends was, part of our Quaker tradition, that it's long and an honored tradition. And I wonder how many of you have stayed with each other in each other's homes. Just look around and think about that for a minute. Yeah, lots of you, I'm sure. He said, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that." And I said, "Well, listen, I'll just set these up for you and then you can do that." So he and his daughter had a wonderful trip. And when he returned home, he phoned me up right away. He was so full of energy and excitement. I'd hardly seen him that excited, but he relayed the bits of conversation that were meaningful. And he talked about returning to them for another visit. This was new for him, and the discovery of hospitality, home hospitality, was palpable. Now, there are rules about hospitality, of knowing what to do when. And this is partly what makes people nervous about accepting hospitality, especially from somebody they don't know or it's from another culture. It may not be entirely clear when or where to sit, what you can or cannot ask. In my grandmother's home, we could never talk about politics, partly because she would just get so rattled. Whether you can clear the table or do the washing up, which I learned somewhat reluctantly with my friends in Kenya, that for me, I wanted to be helpful and I wanted to help in the kitchen and help clear the table. Unacceptable. No, as guest, the guest never would do that in Kenya. So, when it comes to hospitality, sharing food is optional, but expressing love is imperative. Love is eager and energetic. Love desires to learn to be of service. Love is the mother tongue of the soul. Goodness transcends all else. It is what gives value to one's life. It allows us to be open to all that is holy. Could your guest be an angel or Jesus among us? The angel among us is unaware of being God's messenger. Reception allows us to not only experience a new openness to our guest or our host, but reception brings us toward the other with anticipation. In the Last Supper, Jesus and the disciples actually never got around to eating. Why? They were so excited to share Passover, so they never really ate. That's what fed their souls, being together, knowing that love. The Greek word for hospitality means love of guests, where you are both stranger and guest. Hospitality is about giving and receiving. It is about the character of the relationship. Being under the care of your host, you can experience refreshment, renewal, caring, pleasure. The host can provide a sense of safety, and this opens us to unexpected goodness. In Hebrews 13, we read, quote, "Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it." Hebrews refers back to Exodus 23, where God instructed his people not to oppress a stranger because they knew what it was like to be a stranger. My husband David and I love to sing a song called A Tramp in the Street. I'm not going to sing it, but I'll share some of the words. If Jesus should come and knock on your door for a place to come in and bread for your store, would you welcome him in or turn him away and leave him to die on the street where he lay? He was Mary's own darling. He was God's chosen son. Once he was fair and once he was young. Mary, she rocked him, her darling, to sleep. But they left him to die like a tramp on the street. Hospitality is about generosity and attentiveness to what is new, to give and receive. It's about being receptive, to welcome the stranger and be open to what you may learn from the relationship. Think about a time you received hospitality from another person. Perhaps it was someone known to you or not. But think of the conversation, what you learned about this person, what you gained just by being in his or her presence, how your time together opened your heart. Think about a time when you hosted someone and enjoyed it so much that you thought about your conversation for days. It's kind of like a good movie that stays with you for many days and you keep thinking about it. I love when you've had somebody over for dinner and all you can do is keep replaying and thinking about how that conversation went. That's lovely. So we've talked about reception, and I want to talk now about mutual recognition. There's a common purpose in being together and a willingness not to impose one's own worldview. Showing an interest in each other, finding a place to meet, means you can listen well and respond with generosity. Are you able to hear language that is not your usual language? Can you ask, for example, what does the word Christ mean to you? We make so many assumptions in our hope for common language. We often assume the other feels as we do about a particular word or idea. So the difference in language does not need to be the end of the conversation, but rather the beginning of a new understanding. That is, if you are receptive and if there's mutual recognition. Do no harm. Invite each other into new growth. With mutuality, bypassing or ignoring a wound is not the same as healing a wound. It's in relationship that we can help bring healing to one another. I was a feminist. Well, actually, I'm still a feminist, of course. And as a young adult, I would insist, especially that my father and other people use inclusive gender language. I mean, I was really, I never gave up on that. I would be relentless, and I'm sure I annoyed him no end. That's the child's prerogative, right? To annoy your parents, just like your parents, you can annoy your children. Rather, I learned that I could change the language in my own head. I didn't have to always insist that everyone else change their language for me. I could selectively engage others around their language. And when I did, that invited more conversation. So it was a conversation ender, it stopped conversation when I just corrected because it was full of judgment. But when I could rather engage someone around it, what do you mean when you say that? Or this is what it is for me. How do you feel about changing that language? I've had this conversation with my son-in-law, and I think we had a good conversation around it. I don't think it's changed his language, but at least he's been more thoughtful about it. So let's just assume God uses many different radio stations so we can change that station when we need to. Making the effort to know each other in mutual recognition evokes gratitude, and it evokes compassion. Compassion helps us deal with the difference in a gracious way, evoking the effect of suspending judgment. I want to read a brief selection from Karen Armstrong's 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, where she writes, "A person who is impartial, fair, calm, gentle, serene, accepting, and open-hearted is indeed a refuge. A truly compassionate person touches a chord in us that resonates with some of our deepest yearnings. People flock to such people because they seem to offer a haven of peace in a violent and angry world. This is the ideal to which we aspire, and it is not beyond our capacity. But even if we achieve only a fraction of this enlightenment and leave the world marginally better because we have lived in it, our lives will have been worthwhile. There is not much more to be said. We know what we have to do. Our work is just beginning." End of quote. Spiritual hospitality and inclusion, enhanced by reception, mutual recognition, and compassion, opens us to new learning, seen with new eyes, being made new by the other person. And that can lead to personal transformation. This is the power of transformational love at its best, the meeting of suffering and joy, the celebration of having God in our lives, affirmation and appreciation. And I want to interject here just a word about joy, because I consider myself a pretty joyful person. And I think, as Quakers, we suffer with those who are suffering. And that's a lovely, compassionate quality. And sometimes it can make us very serious. But I've learned over the years that you can hold opposing emotions simultaneously. I can feel the fullness of sadness and joy at the same time. I am a very strong proponent of Quaker joy. After all, we have each other, we have a strong faith and a strong purpose. We believe in the power of love and hospitality. And does it get much better than that? That's pretty good. So what about this global imperative? Spiritual hospitality and grounding provides the model for creating peace in the world. It is precious. It transcends difference and our limited humanness. It increases the chance of our becoming more culturally competent. We live in a multicultural world, and we can learn to live together, or we can deepen the divide. And this is particularly true in this country. Having lived outside of the US and having come back to this after 9 years away, it's compelling to me. How do I talk to my neighbor who has a sticker on the bumper of his pickup truck while he lives right next door to me? How can I speak to him? An open conversation. That's what I want to do and try to do. We can engage in conversation that invites understanding, or we can hold damaging assumptions that raise doubt and fear. We can become aware of our hurtful past of colonization and racism, or we can blithely ignore it. When tensions arise, we need to become very curious. And I want to read just one quote from Margaret Wheatley's book, Turning to One Another. And this book is about conversation, how to have conversation with people. She writes, when we're brave enough to risk a conversation, we have the chance to discover what it means to be human. In conversation, we practice good human behaviors. We think, we laugh, we cry, we tell stories of our day. We become visible to one another. We gain insights and new understandings. And as we stay in conversation, we just may discover that we want to be activists in our world. We get interested in what we can do to change things. Conversation wakes us up. We no longer accept being treated poorly. We become people who work to change our situation. This could be just describing us as Quakers, I think. Conversation helps us reclaim these very human capacities and experiences. That is a gesture of love. So this is the complexity of our humanness, isn't it? This is the opportunity for the indwelling spirit to burst forth in full color. As a Quaker, if you expected a quiet existence, well, you're in for a surprise. Being a Quaker breaks us out of our prophetic resistance. Even though we wait in silence to hear the voice of God, I have never known God to be silent. God is for me wide awake, showing me the way in what later seems rather obvious, even if I'm a bit slow to recognize just how that message is coming to me. But it gives me great joy to be drawn out of my comfortable seat. Actually, I like that one, in the kind of the middle of that second pew. There's where, no, my comfortable seat, right. To discover the freshness of life's surprise. And how does our Quakerness look to others? You know, I've done a lot of work in ecumenical settings on a global level, which is fascinating. I learned a lot, but it makes me think about how do we look to others? Our lack of ritual gives me a sense of freedom. I love that. You know, we gave up ritual and, you know, but for Muslims, ritual itself is described as a way to free the mind. And it's kind of like the Buddhist bowl that holds things inside it. You know, that gives freedom to be in a new way. I just hadn't really thought about it that way. So it's again, a new way of looking at what feels important to me as a Quaker. We develop our own dialect and it often defines us. I personally would place an emphasis on nonviolence. And I've had many conversations with many people in other denominations who don't understand my conviction that no human being should ever kill another human being, you know, our own species. Why would we ever do that? I mean, you know, I'm really clear about that conviction. And I like that conviction. I like feeling so clear about it. But my conviction stated that strongly is more often an end to the conversation rather than opening it up. And I want to find ways to engage others, to acknowledge and respect our different viewpoints. It is a risk to use my own language too strongly in conversation with others, even while I appreciate the strength of my conviction. I want to encounter God anew, to resign myself to God and to experience a loss of self in that encounter. I want to live in awe rather than in being so sure of myself. I'm coming to a place of softness in my relationships. I no longer want to be right. And, you know, I no longer want to be in charge of the universe, even though my husband says I am. I keep saying to him, no, I'm not. I'm resigning from that. I'm no longer in charge of the universe. I can leave it to God. And that's what I want to do. I want us to be guests in one another's lives, drawing on awe, wonder, gratitude, attention to the present moment, long and enduring friendships, the willingness to savor the moment for what it is, mutual transformation. It's not just about me, but it's about doing that with another person, stretching, experiencing curiosity about myself and others, opportunity to feel that spiritual awakening, all in response to the person sitting across the table from me. What makes us come alive? What is vitality for us? I'm coming close to the conclusion. Simon Peter was asked by Jesus 3 times. You remember what he asked? Do you love me? And in spite of Simon Peter, who made a lot of mistakes, Jesus stuck with him and he kept asking him, do you love me? And Simon Peter didn't trust Jesus really, but Jesus was present and persistent, and he continued to speak to Simon Peter in the same way that he does for us today. Jesus models continuous care, and we must have true compassion for ourselves and for each other. We have many moments of awakening, like Simon Peter. I want to close by reading a poem. Again, it's by Margaret Wheatley in the same book, Turning to One Another, Simple Conversations to Restore Hope to the Future. So I leave you with this. There is no power greater than the community discovering what it cares about. Ask what's possible, not what's wrong, and keep asking. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dreams. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Talk to people you know. Talk to people you don't know. Talk to people you never talk to. Be intrigued by the differences you hear. Expect to be surprised. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Invite in everybody who cares to work on what's possible. Acknowledge that everyone is an expert about something. Know that creative solutions come from new connections. Remember, you don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that meaningful conversations can change your world. Rely on human goodness and stay together.